Rain hammered the prison transport bus as Marcus Reed sat chained to the steel bench, staring through the scratched window into absolute darkness. Nobody talked, not the guards, not the inmates. The only sound was the storm outside, and the occasional rattle of chains every time the bus hit another pothole. Marcus had already been transferred through 3 prisons in 4 years, but something about this place felt wrong long before he even saw it. Then lightning flashed. For 1 second, the prison appeared on the hill ahead. Massive concrete walls, watchtowers, rust-covered fencing, and somehow it looked abandoned. The bus rolled through the front gate with a loud metallic groan. One of the guards muttered quietly, "Welcome to Blackthorn Penitentiary." The inmates were unloaded one by one beneath flickering floodlights. Marcus immediately noticed something strange. Nobody made eye contact, not even the guards. Inside processing, an older corrections officer checked Marcus's paperwork. The man's tired eyes suddenly froze on one specific line. Housing assignment. Cell 14, East Block. The officer slowly looked up. "You got disciplinary problems?" Marcus shrugged. "Depends who you ask." The old guard didn't smile. Instead, he grabbed the papers and whispered something to another officer standing nearby. The second guard looked disturbed. Marcus caught only part of the sentence. Thought that cell was closed. A cold feeling crawled into Marcus's stomach. 20 minutes later, he was escorted down East Block. The deeper they walked, the quieter the prison became. Most cell blocks were loud, shouting, metal banging, inmates yelling. Not here. East Block felt dead. Half the overhead lights flickered weakly above the long concrete corridor. Some cells were completely empty. Others had doors welded shut. Marcus noticed scratches covering the walls. Not random scratches. Tollies, thousands of them. As if someone had spent years counting days. Finally, the guards stopped in front of cell 14. One guard unlocked the heavy steel door while the older officer avoided looking inside. Marcus smirked nervously. "What? Somebody die in here or something?" Neither guard answered. The cell door creaked open. Small concrete room, metal bed, sink, toilet, nothing unusual. But the air inside felt freezing cold. The older guard finally spoke. "Lights out at 10. Then he hesitated. "And whatever you hear tonight," he looked Marcus dead in the eyes. "Do not look through the bars." The door slammed shut. Marcus laughed under his breath. Crazy old man. But hours later, lying alone in darkness, those words came back to him. "Do not look through the bars." By midnight, Marcus realized something was seriously wrong with East Block. There were no sounds, no talking, no footsteps, nothing. It was like the entire prison had vanished. Then came the whispering. Marcus opened his eyes slowly. At first, it sounded distant, like someone talking through walls. He sat up on the bed. The whispers became clearer. Dozens of voices, soft, unintelligible, coming from somewhere inside the cell. Marcus stepped onto the cold floor. The whispers instantly stopped. Silence. He scanned the room carefully. Nothing. Then, scratch, scratch, scratch. Marcus froze. The sound came from beneath the bed, slow scratching, like fingernails dragging across concrete. He backed away slowly. "Who's there?" No answer. The scratching continued, then suddenly stopped. Marcus forced himself forward and looked beneath the metal bed frame. Nothing. Empty darkness. He exhaled shakily and stood back up. That's when he noticed the toilet. The water inside had turned completely black. Marcus stared at it in confusion. A terrible smell filled the cell, rotting, wet, like something dead underground. Then the whispers returned, closer this time, right beside his ear. "Look outside." Marcus spun around violently. Nobody there. His breathing became heavier. He checked the small clock mounted above the hallway outside. 3:13 a.m. At that exact second, something walked past his cell. Marcus only caught movement from the corner of his eye. Slow footsteps echoed through East Block. Step, drag, step, drag. Marcus remembered the warning, "Do not look through the bars," but curiosity slowly overpowered fear. The footsteps stopped directly outside cell 14. Silence. Marcus stood frozen. Then came a soft cracking noise, like bones moving. Very slowly, Marcus approached the cell door. Every instinct screamed at him to stop, but he looked anyway and immediately wished he hadn't. A man stood outside the bars, tall, thin, wearing an old prison uniform stained almost black. His head hung unnaturally sideways, as if his neck had been broken. Marcus stumbled backward in horror. The figure slowly lifted its face. Its jaw was shattered, pieces of bone visible through torn flesh. But somehow, it was smiling. Marcus couldn't breathe. The thing stepped closer to the bars. Its eyes looked hollow, dead, empty. Then it whispered, "You're in my cell." Marcus screamed for the guards. No answer. The figure twitched violently, bones cracking beneath its skin. Then something impossible happened. It walked forward, straight through the steel bars. Marcus fell backward against the wall. The air inside the cell became ice-cold instantly. The figure tilted its broken head, still smiling. Then every light in East Block exploded at once. Darkness swallowed the prison. Marcus heard screaming all around him. Not one voice. Hundreds. The dead inmate suddenly lunged toward him. Marcus woke up screaming on the floor while guards restrained him violently. "Get him out." "Move!" Marcus fought desperately as they dragged him through East Block, and for one brief second he looked back at cell 14. Something stood inside the darkness watching him, smiling. The next morning, Marcus demanded answers. The older corrections officer finally sat across from him in silence, then slid an old photograph across the table. Marcus's blood ran cold. The man in the picture was the thing from the cell. Same broken jaw, same dead eyes. "Inmate Daniel Harlow," the guard said quietly, 1978. Marcus stared at the photo. What happened to him? The officer looked pale. He was locked in cell 14 for 9 months after murdering another inmate. The guard swallowed hard. One night officers heard screaming. By the time they opened the door, he paused. Harlow had clawed his own eyes out. Marcus felt sick. The guard leaned closer, but before he died, his voice dropped to a whisper. He kept saying somebody else was living in that cell with him. Silence filled the room. Then the guard said something Marcus would never forget. "We sealed cell 14 years ago." Marcus frowned slowly. "What?" The officer's face turned white. "Last night, you were never supposed to be placed in there." Atononat. Officer Daniel Hayes started his first night shift at Blackridge State Prison during the worst thunderstorm of the year. Rain slammed against the guard tower windows while lightning flashed across the massive concrete walls surrounding the prison. Daniel adjusted his uniform nervously as the shift captain handed him a flashlight and a ring of old steel keys. "You'll be covering D Block tonight." Daniel nodded. "Death row?" The captain's expression changed immediately. "Officially, it's closed." Daniel frowned. "Then why patrol it?" No answer. The older guards standing nearby avoided eye contact completely. One of them quietly muttered, "Poor guy." Daniel forced a laugh. "What's that supposed to mean?" The captain ignored the question. "Just walk the block every hour." He hesitated. "And don't stay near cell 9 too long." Daniel waited for an explanation. None came. By 11:47 p.m., Daniel stood alone outside the entrance to the abandoned execution wing. The hallway beyond looked ancient. Rust covered the bars, paint peeled from concrete walls. Half the ceiling lights flickered weakly overhead. A faded sign still hung above the entrance. Death Row Unit D. Daniel stepped inside. Immediately the temperature dropped. The air felt strangely heavy, wet, like the entire wing had been sealed underground for decades. His boots echoed loudly as he walked past empty cells. Most doors hung open. Inside were old mattresses, cracked sinks, and walls covered with scratched messages from inmates long dead. Some were impossible to read, others weren't. "He's still here. Don't let him see you. Cell 9 is not empty." Daniel stopped reading. "This place is ridiculous." Then the lights flickered. For a split second, the hallway went completely dark. When the lights returned, one of the cell doors ahead was slowly moving. Creak! Daniel froze. The cell door continued swinging gently back and forth. He swallowed hard and approached carefully. Empty. Nobody inside. He exhaled nervously. Probably loose hinges. Then came the sound. Clang. Daniel spun around. A cell door farther down the hall had just slammed shut. Then another. Clang. 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 One by one, every empty cell door in D Block began slamming shut violently. Daniel backed away in panic. "What the hell?" The hallway lights flickered wildly now. His radio exploded with static, and somewhere deep in the block, someone laughed. Not loud, not human. Low, wet, broken. Daniel grabbed the radio. "Daniel, Control, do you copy?" Only static answered. Then a voice whispered through the speaker. "Turn around." Daniel slowly looked behind him. Nobody there. But at the far end of the hallway, cell 9 was open. Daniel was absolutely certain it had been closed before. A dim light flickered inside. Against every instinct, he moved toward it, step by step. The closer he got, the worse the smell became. Burned flesh. The stench filled the hallway so heavily Daniel nearly gagged. Finally, he reached cell 9. Empty. But the walls inside were blackened, like something had burned alive in there. Daniel noticed old scratch marks covering the concrete, thousands of them, and written across the wall in faded brown stains, "I didn't die alone." Suddenly, bzzzt, the security monitor mounted above the hallway flickered on by itself. Daniel looked up. The camera feed showed him standing outside cell 9, but there was something else in the footage. A man standing directly behind him. Daniel's blood froze. Slowly, he turned around. Nothing there. He looked back at the monitor. The figure remained, tall, burned, wearing an inmate uniform. Its skin looked melted onto its face, and it was smiling. Daniel stumbled backward in horror. The figure on the monitor slowly raised one burned hand and pointed down the hallway. The feed suddenly cut to static. Then every light in D block went out. Complete darkness swallowed the execution wing. Daniel's flashlight shook violently in his hand as he switched it on. The narrow beam illuminated floating dust, rusted bars, empty cells. Then, drag. Something metal scraped across the floor nearby. Drag, drag, drag. Chains, heavy chains moving through the darkness. Daniel aimed the flashlight down the hallway. Nothing. But the dragging sound kept getting closer. His breathing became rapid. Then the flashlight beam landed on footprints, wet black footprints, appearing one at a time on the concrete floor, as if something invisible was walking toward him. Drag, step closer, closer. Daniel backed away quickly until he slammed into a locked steel door, the execution chamber. Suddenly the room behind the door lit up bright white. Electrical buzzing filled the hallway. Daniel stared through the tiny glass window. The electric chair was active. Sparks burst from the straps. Smoke curled toward the ceiling, and someone was sitting in it. The figure's head hung forward, motionless. Burned skin, blackened arms, smoking restraints. Then, slowly, its head lifted. Daniel nearly screamed. The burned inmate stared directly at him through the glass, smiling. The lights overhead exploded. Glass rained across the floor, and every speaker inside D block suddenly turned on at once. Multiple voices began whispering together. "Daniel! Daniel! Daniel!" The chamber door clicked open by itself. Daniel stumbled backward. The electric chair continued sparking violently inside the room. The burned inmate slowly stood up, bones cracking, smoke rising from its body. Its eyes were completely white. Then it stepped out of the chamber. Drag, step, drag, step. Heavy chains wrapped around its ankles. Daniel ran. He sprinted through the hallway while cell doors slammed open around him. The whispers became screams. Hands suddenly reached through bars as he passed, dozens of pale hands clawing at the air. The burned figure kept coming. Not fast, slow, certain. Daniel finally saw the exit ahead. Lightning flashed through the prison windows. He lunged through the security door and collapsed into the main corridor outside D block. The steel door behind him slammed shut instantly. Silence. The other guards stared at him in horror. Daniel could barely breathe. One older officer slowly asked, "You saw him, didn't you?" Daniel looked up shakily. "Who was that?" The room went silent. Finally, the shift captain answered, "Elias Mercer." Daniel listened carefully while rain thundered outside. 1971, the captain said quietly. Mercer murdered 4 inmates during a prison riot. The older guard swallowed hard. They executed him in D block. Daniel's voice trembled. "That thing in there wasn't human." The captain nodded slowly. Right before they turned on the chair, Mercer looked at the witnesses and smiled. Lightning flashed across the room. Then the captain whispered, "His last words were..." The lights flickered. "I won't leave this place alone." Nobody liked working the underground cells at Grey Hollow Prison. Not the guards. Not the maintenance workers. Nobody. The isolation wing sat beneath the prison itself, buried under concrete and rusted pipes, like something intentionally hidden from the world above. Even veteran officers avoided going down there alone. Officer Luis Moreno learned why on a freezing November night. It started with inmate 271, Ethan Cole, 32 years old, extremely violent. Multiple assaults inside prison. After nearly killing another inmate during a cafeteria fight, Ethan was transferred to solitary confinement underground. Cell S6, the lowest cell in the prison. The guards dragged Ethan down the narrow staircase in chains while he screamed threats the entire way. "You can't lock me down there. You hear me?" Luis walked behind the group, holding a flashlight. The deeper they descended, the colder the air became. The underground corridor looked ancient. Concrete walls sweating with moisture, flickering lights, rust stains running down the pipes overhead. At the very end of the hallway sat Cell S6, heavy steel door, tiny food slot, no windows. One of the older guards unlocked it slowly. The door groaned open. Darkness waited inside. Ethan immediately stopped resisting. Luis noticed the inmate staring into the cell with sudden fear. "Get inside," a guard ordered. Ethan didn't move. For the first time since arriving at the prison, he looked terrified. "There's somebody in there," he whispered. The guards laughed. Luis shined his flashlight inside. Empty concrete room. Metal bed bolted to the floor. Toilet. Nothing else. "Move." The guards shoved Ethan inside and slammed the steel door shut. At first, everything seemed normal, until the first night. Around 2:40 a.m., Luis sat alone in the underground security office, drinking stale coffee when screaming echoed through the hallway. Not angry screaming, pure terror. Luis grabbed his flashlight and ran toward S6. Ethan was pounding violently against the steel door. "Get him out! Get him out of here!" Luis unlocked the food slot carefully. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Ethan's face appeared in the narrow opening, completely pale. His eyes looked wet with tears. "There's someone in the cell." Luis frowned. "You're alone." "No, I'm not." Ethan looked over his shoulder into the darkness behind him, then whispered, "He talks when the lights go out." Luis felt chills crawl up his arms. Before he could respond, Ethan suddenly screamed and backed away from the door, as if something had moved behind Luis. The slot slammed shut. Luis stood frozen. Then came a scratching sound from inside the cell. Slow, deliberate, scratch, 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 like fingernails dragging across concrete walls. Luis stepped back uneasily. The scratching continued for nearly an hour. The next morning, guards entered S6 for inspection. They found Ethan curled in the corner, shaking violently. Dark circles hung beneath his eyes. He looked exhausted. One guard laughed. "Guess solitary's breaking you already." Ethan grabbed the officer's arm desperately. "You have to move me." "No, he comes out at night." The room fell silent. Luis noticed fresh scratches covering the walls now. Long, deep marks carved into solid concrete. There was no way Ethan could made them with bare hands. The guards noticed too, but nobody said anything. That night, Luis volunteered for another underground shift, mostly because he wanted answers. At exactly 3:07 a.m., the screaming started again, this time worse. Luis sprinted down the corridor. Ethan was crying hysterically inside S6. "He's standing in the corner. Oh God, he's getting closer." Luis looked through the tiny inspection hatch on the door. At first, he saw nothing except darkness. Then lightning flashed outside somewhere far above the prison. For one brief second, the cell illuminated, and Luis saw it. A figure crouched in the far corner of the room, too tall, too thin, its arms bent at unnatural angles. Ethan sat pressed against the opposite wall, trembling violently. The figure slowly moved its head toward the inspection hatch. Luis staggered backward in horror. Its eyes reflected in the darkness. Not human eyes, bright, white, glowing. Then the cell lights exploded. The entire underground wing went dark instantly. Ethan began screaming louder than before. Luis fumbled for his flashlight, hands shaking violently. By the time the flashlight turned on, the screaming had stopped. Complete silence filled the underground corridor. Luis approached the door carefully. "Ethan!" No answer. He radioed for backup. 3 guards arrived minutes later. Nobody wanted to open the cell, but they had to. The steel door unlocked with a loud metallic click and slowly swung open. Luis aimed the flashlight inside, then froze. Ethan's body sat in the center of the floor, his head tilted upward, eyes wide open, mouth stretched into a silent scream, dead. The concrete walls surrounding him were covered in writing. Words scratched everywhere in dark blood. "Do not turn off the lights. He walks in the dark. He was here first." One guard vomited instantly. Another backed out of the room whispering prayers. Luis stared at the far corner of the cell. Something about it felt wrong. The darkness there looked deeper somehow, like light itself couldn't fully reach it. Then his flashlight flickered. For one split second, he saw a tall shape standing in the corner, watching them. The light stabilized again. Nothing there. Backup officers sealed S6 permanently the next morning. Official reports claimed Ethan Cole died from cardiac arrest. But every guard working underground knew the truth. Something else had been inside that cell. Weeks later, Luis prepared to leave after finishing another night shift. As he passed the underground staircase, he heard scratching beneath the floor. Scratch! 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 Slowly, Luis looked down toward the darkness below. Then came a whisper from deep underground. Soft, broken. Turn lights off.